Welcome to Workers Rock, a podcast that explores this truth that we have the power to change the culture of employment across the globe. I'm Emerette Miller, the host of Workers Rock. Workers Rock is part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. Well, welcome to Workers Rock, Scott. My name is Emerette Miller, here with Scott Santens, the godfather of universal basic income. Scott is the founder of Income to Support All Foundation. How are you, Scott?
Good. How about you, Emerette? It's nice to be here.
Thank you for joining me today. Where are you at right now?
In DC.
Okay. I'm here in Rochester, New York. So I see you on Twitter talking about universal basic income and like you've got all these wonderful things to say and this following. And it just seems that you have such a handle on this. How many years have you been an advocate?
I got into this in 2013, so this is my 11th year, I guess.
What inspired you back then?
I got into it from the perspective of kind of the future of technology and work. You know, even back then, uh, it was a way to enter the conversation space. It actually wasn't at the time. There wasn't a whole lot of concern or worry about the future of work just yet, but it actually happened like later that year. So I just kind of got into it just a little bit before everyone started worrying about artificial intelligence and the impact of robots and everything. Um, but that's how I got into it, was just thinking about the future and looking into this potential solution, learning all about it, learning about the history of it and the evidence that had already been studied, even as far back as the 70s, and the history of how a version of it almost passed under Nixon and was proposed by Nixon, passed the House in 1771, and didn't actually ever make it through the Senate. But just learning all this stuff, it was just very fascinating to me, and eventually I just reached the point um, where I just decided that this is something that actually isn't only about automation and the future of work. It's really something we should have done decades ago, just because it plain works better.
So how is this normally achieved? Is it a check in the mail? Is it like a tax rebate?
Yeah, there are a lot of options to do this. I think a good way to think about how it might be implemented is to look at either Social Security or at the most recent enhanced child tax credit that we did in 2021.
Mhm.
So, like, Social Security is very simplified, and that's really just about, you have your Social Security number and you have your address or bank information, and it just either gets direct deposited or sent to you, on a monthly basis. And the way the child tax credit worked was to give you the option to do monthly payments, in which case that too would be checks or direct deposits to your bank account. Or also you could just take it as a tax credit at the end of the year. And so that's another way that it could work, is people could just say, hey, I'll just take, if it's a $1,000 a month basic income, then I'll just take $12,000 off my taxes at the end of the year instead of the monthly payments. And if you wanted the monthly payments, you can do that.
This seems like a true trickle down. Like, what are the benefits to the economy? Because I just see that, people will go ahead and go to CVS locally, they'll go to their mall. Of course, we have online purchasing, you can't get away from that. But what are some of the benefits to the economy that you know of?
Yeah, instead of trickle down, I would say it's kind of more like flow up or grow up, where it really it just gets those economic resources directly, at the bottom, and everybody starts that way. It's this foundation where everybody can start from, And as you said, this money spent, and it's mostly spent locally. People
Mhm.
can go to their local stores, go to your grocery store, you buy food. That income, then is that spending becomes people's incomes who work there, and then people whose wages those are, they spend that locally, or else they can spend it, let's say, at a company like Amazon or something.
Mhm.
And so you're getting money to across the country as well. But it is very impactful to local economies, and this has been studied quite a bit, even just unconditional cash transfers around the world, as far as what are the multiplier effects. Even look at the multiplier effects of stuff like Snap, which is also similar in what you can spend it at grocery stores. And it's usually around $2 of economic growth impact per $1 spent.
Mhm.
So it's it's uh, it's much more impactful. And then if you this is spending at the bottom versus spending at the top. And
Mhm.
there's studies looking at this too, where let's say a dollar in the hands of a minimum wage worker is like a dollar and a dollar 20. And if you instead put that dollar in the hands of someone in the top 1%, unlike someone working for Wall Street or something, and that dollar has about 39 cents of an impact on GDP. So it's three times as impactful for someone in the lower income ranges to spend a dollar, or to have a dollar because they'll spend it, versus
Mhm.
someone towards the top.
So, say in a pilot, how long would this have to be done to actually measure the results?
I prefer to see pilots that are at least 2 years. I think sweet spot is kind of more like 3 to 5 years, and anything more than that, um, it's to be preferable if you could, the longer the better, but it's much more expensive the longer you go. And also it's just delaying actual implementation and stuff. So around at this point, I think 2 to 3 years is good, but there's still stuff to learn from even just 1 year. um it's just preferable to do longer.
Are there any countries or municipalities around the world that do this normally, like it's their thing?
Yeah, so I guess before I get into that, I would just make sure everyone knows what the definition of basic income is. And a basic income is a periodic cash payment, unconditionally delivered to all, on an individual basis without means test or work requirement. So there is one place in the world that has actually been doing this since 1982, and that's the state of Alaska. The state of Alaska has been
Right.
providing a universal dividend on an annual basis. The amount averages between $1,000 to $2,000. It's been as high as around $3,300 twice, and this is everybody, fully universal. So that's kids and adults, besides just rich and poor. Every Alaskan can get this payment, and it's really interesting to see the studies of the impacts of this payment, because especially this is a very large and long implementation, with over 40 years of data to look
Mhm.
at. And like one of the impacts has been that employment has increased. And the study that did this did they created something called a synthetic control, which
Mhm.
was kind of a creation of a control group through kind of combining other states together to compare that against Alaska. And the results of this was they determined that full time employment, let's see, slightly decreased
Mhm.
among the people of Alaska, but at the same time, there was that spending impact, which created jobs, which allowed more people who, let's say, were outside of the labor market to take those jobs, so that the overall net impact of full time employment was neutral. But then there was an increase of 17% with part time employment. So
Mhm.
this is just, it seemed to, you know, make it more of a good deal for someone to earn a little bit more money with part-time employment, and then also the impact from probably the spending too, which created those additional jobs. um, but then there's other things too that we've been observed in Alaska that I think is interesting, as far as like babies born healthier
Right.
due to better maternal nutrition,
Mhm.
and reduced obesity, and also reduced child abuse. So this is
Right.
less reports to Child Protective Services.
What about the population increase? Has it helped at all in that area?
Yeah, there. One of the studies did look at if it increased fertility rates, and it's so if you just look at the data, if you just look at the fertility rate chart of Alaska, you'll see that since 1982 and even before, it just like was going down, along with the rest of the country, which has also been going down.
Right.
But then again, with this kind of analysis to see, kind of teasing out what the impact would be, the study found that it was higher than it would have otherwise been. Um, where essentially, it's not that people are, you know, that families are starting just to have the dividend payment, because that's ridiculous.
Right.
Like it does not even close to paying, enough for
Uh,
to make that profitable or something. Um,
exactly.
but what it does do is it makes it less prohibitively expensive to start a family. So if there's fewer people who are in the position of saying, I really want to have kids, but I can't afford it. In Alaska, thanks to the dividend, there's some more people who are like, well, actually, thanks to this, it I can afford it to a greater degree.
Right. So, like, what's the range? Like, UBI, it can't be 25 bucks a month. Like, like, what should it be? What's the ideal amount that you see that for it to work?
Uh, to see impacts are actually surprisingly low. And there's a lot of different studies of a lot of different amounts, but one of the lowest was something that we observed even like during COVID, which was kind of, it wasn't really designed as a basic income experiment. It was just a nonprofit that this was living in Chelsea, Massachusetts, that decided during the pandemic, where they were having this was a food bank, they were giving out food, and of course you had people lining up during a pandemic. That seemed unwise, and just spending so many hours, it
Mhm.
was just so burdensome for everybody involved, where they thought, well, why don't we just give people debit cards, and they
Right.
can just go to stores and buy food instead of coming here to the food bank, and maybe that'll be better. So they did that. And the way that was designed was, it was $200 per month
Mhm.
per adult, um, such that you had, let's say, if you were a single adult, you got $200 per month, and then if you were a household of two or more, then it was $400 per month. So this
Right.
is, just a basic income, essentially $200 per person. And that had, very just what you would expect as far as being able to afford food.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't really take a lot to reduce the stress of saying, am I going to be able to afford food next month? Um, uh, and just by having that, reduces stress, and what that study even or that program showed too was again this real local economic effect that people did spend most of it in the local area, and that was like a huge boost to local businesses during this time, of course, where businesses were having a really hard time during the
Right.
pandemic. So that was surprisingly impactful. I feel for $2 per month,
Right.
even though like I crowdfunded my own basic income back in 2015, and that was even this process of going from zero up to my goal of being $1,000 per month
Uh-huh.
for perpetuity. I learned myself, I experienced this at around that same area. This when you can afford food, and
Mhm.
that's around $200, $300 per month. In that range, when you're not really worrying about like basic food survival, um, it really does lift this weight off your shoulders. Where you're just like, okay, I've got that whole not starving thing down. Like I
Right,
can,
like, less stressed,
yeah.
like, does it, impact, like, hospital stays and, like, healthcare at all?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I mean, let's see. Another pilot to mention was the Stockton pilot. That was one of the earlier pilots at the by a city. This was by Mayor Michael Tubbs, and this was $500 per month for 2 years. And the result of that again was increased employment. So
Mhm,
that was it was people who received that $500 a month ended up finding full time employment at twice the rate of the control group that didn't get any payments, and then they also found this strong impact on mental health that was equivalent to taking medication. And so instead of that's a good cost savings there as well, to not
mhm,
have to buy medication and still have that impact. Not that that will work for everybody, but it does have that impact. This reduced stress leading to better mental health a lot of the times. And it was also this health effect was observed back in the 70s
mhm.
in Dauphin, Manitoba, where they essentially eliminated poverty for about 4 years in the
Wow.
small town of Dauphin, and hospitalization rates decreased by 8.5%. And it was determined as being mostly through the impact of reduced stress leading to like fewer work related injuries.
You say it was 4 years, why did they stop?
It was political. So
Mm,
this was a pilot. It was always, going to be a pilot. And instead of continuing on the pilot and stuff, there was a change of political leadership. And the new party came in and was like, yeah, I don't we don't want to really continue this. So that was it was
mm,
one of those instances where they kind of just like boxed up all the data, and then a researcher named Evelyn Forget came in like years later, uh, decades later even, and dug up all those boxes and the data and
mhm.
went through it to find a lot of this stuff because they just didn't even bother at the time to do this analysis. And then she was the one who found that it actually decreased hospitalization rates, among other things.
Might seem like a simple question here, but if someone is homeless, um, like, how do they receive it? Has that ever been a problem? Like, some people just
Oh, sure.
need more help with, like, bank accounts or
Yeah, yeah, and this is something that the government has already attempted to address in various ways, and I think there's various options. Some I prefer more than others. Like one option is the use of debit cards, so that you
Mhm,
can just reload the debit card over and over again. In which case, you wouldn't necessarily need a bank account in order to have that for spending and for withdrawing cash from ATMs and stuff.
mhm,
That's one method. Um, I would prefer, even like on a, if we're talking like national implementation basis, to
Right.
utilize some kind of public banking system. That's something that I think we already need. But
Mhm.
it's something where you could utilize post offices as banks, and you can have an online system, and it would be free for everybody. Make it really easy to set up. You just need your social security number,
Mhm.
this kind of thing.
So, like, say that San Francisco did this. Are they doing this right now? Just but say they are. Would, like, Elon Musk get a check too, or is there, like, an income cap, or, like, how does that work?
Yeah, so Elon Musk would get basic income too, but he would pay more in additional new taxes than the amount of the basic income.
Right. I see. Where is it most successful? Like, in cities? Do you see it in states? Will we ever see it across the country?
Well, to bring up again an example from the pandemic, we kind of got a little taste of it
Oh, yeah.
with the stimulus
The
checks.
STEMI.
Yeah. It was unfortunate that it wasn't monthly. It was something I was pushing for that whole time, just to have, like, some amount of um of of basic income on a monthly basis. And instead it was, just three different checks, and we never knew if we were going to get one or what the amount would be.
Mhm.
So that's not the best example, but what is a good example, or why it was like basic income, is just because it did go out to many people, even though it still
Right.
had a phase out rate, and was didn't have work requirements. So that was like, it was additional to anything that people were earning, which is also something, it's good to understand about basic income.
Right, like, what did it do? It did something positive for the economy, right? Like, what was it
Oh yeah.
doing?
It's unfortunate that that this happened during a pandemic, in which case it's really hard to draw certain conclusions as to what would happen during normal times.
Mhm,
Um, so there 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 are things to learn from it, and things to be wary of, to take away from it. Like, one of those things is that people blame the stimulus checks for inflation that happened afterwards.
mm,
And one of these things that's important to understand is that, well, this was a pandemic, and this inflation was global. And so countries around the world saw this large increase in inflation, regardless of any program that they did or didn't do.
mhm,
It was still observed. This is a global phenomenon. So it did contribute somewhat to inflation in the US here.
right,
um, but at the same time, it is, it was not the main culprit. And the main issue was that we were in a pandemic, and that economic capacity to meet demand was reduced. And there was a big shift from services to goods. So means that a bunch of restaurants were closed, and then people would
mhm,
usually have spent their money at restaurants, but now they're stuck indoors, and so they're buying goods from, say, Amazon and stuff,
right,
and then
right.
that stuff's being shipped in from wherever. And it was really hard for suppliers to keep up with demand, because that demand was so much higher than usual. And then also the ability to meet that demand was even gummed up by supply chain issues due to the
Mhm,
pandemic. So there's like a big mess that happened.
mhm,
But on the plus side of this too is that it was very smart of us to make sure that that demand stayed strong, so that then when the economy reopened, then we were able to blast back off, and a bunch of new jobs were created. People got reemployed, and we had strong GDP growth, and we're still seeing that now. So if you look at what we did as during the pandemic versus what we did during the banking crisis in 2008, 2009, and then the Great Recession that followed, um, it was because that we had such a strong stimulus response this time around that we just didn't see, 5 years of just like really high unemployment and just taking forever to really recover from that. This time around, we recovered very quickly, and kudos I should be given, I believe, to those who really insisted on a strong demand response.
We I feel like we have UBI in a way for nonprofits if you think about it. Like I know the mark of an area stricken by poverty is how many nonprofits you see in their area.
Yeah.
And they receive money from the government or different, organizations to support those who are experiencing poverty. How is UBI then different in any way?
Yeah, what's different about UBI is it's really trusting people.
Mhm.
And that's what's so difficult for both governments and even charities to really wrap their heads around or accept. Which you'll hear this as, oh, we can't give people money because they're going to spend it on drugs. We can't give people money; they're going to waste it on this or that. They're going to be lazy or whatever. So governments always want to do some kind of behavioral requirements, and they also like to do benefits in kind. So they'll
Right.
do, what else can we send that's not cash because we don't want them to have cash, and nonprofits do the same thing. They'll look at a specific group, and basically immediately say, you know what, that group that we really care about, um, we don't trust them with cash. Like they're
Mhm,
going to
yeah, like,
use
they're
it.
making the decisions,
Right.
yeah,
And so we're
yeah,
gonna we're gonna get them what they do need, and it's this. And I know they need this because I've thought about what they need, and I think that this is the best decision for them.
right,
So
right,
that's
right,
all
yeah.
very paternalistic throughout
It's
both
kinda
the
like the same
government and
idea though,
nonprofits.
like, yeah, so if governments give money to nonprofits in some way and they spend it to help those experiencing poverty, why not just give it straight to the people?
Yeah, yeah. There's like a certain level of trust from the grantor to the grantee
Mhm.
especially when it comes from government to nonprofits, where they're like, we trust that you're going to use this in the best way to help people. And it's organizations, like kind of rare organizations that give directly, and
Yeah.
where they're like, yeah, we're just going to make sure they get cash, without conditions.
Right. So where do you see it, like, happening? Like, are there places out there that are close to making it, like, a part of their structure and their future?
It's it's not close anywhere,
Mm.
I would say right now. I've been pushing for this for over 10 years now, and it feels like there's just this kind of slow rising interest, especially among, the public. But the interest is slower among politicians and lawmakers, and it's a real question as to which country will be the first to do this. Like, of course, I'd like the US to be the first to do this, especially again since Alaska already has a version of this. As far as like an annual UBI, it would be nice if the country as a whole actually did this. But it could be Canada, which is somewhat close. They're, politically speaking, they're actually right now looking at a bill in their Congress that would essentially be a study of basic income to see like what would be the best way of implementing it in Canada. And this would be like a 2 year kind of thing, where at the end of that 2 years they'd have this study and recommendation, um, to say, is this a good idea or isn't it? And if it is a good idea, this is the way we suggest it. And this bill is something that would do it in this way, and this, we should pass this. Um, and they'll just continue to bring up the bill. But the bill right now is just for that report and nothing else. And we'll see that actually passes, there's a good chance that it could. They actually need only one more member in the Senate to support it, and and then I believe it'll move to the House. Or don't really understand Canadian politics fully, but I
Mhm.
just know that it's close, and we'll see what happens there. But yeah, around the world, there's just more discussion in general, and kind of like maybe playing around the edges kind of thing.
Right.
There's South Africa has um, they did a special like relief grant during the pandemic. It was monthly cash to help people um, who were unemployed, and
Mhm.
their unemployment rate uh, during the worst of this was over 50%, and now it's down to like 30 something percent, still very high.
Right.
And they're looking to convert this temporary special relief grant to a what they're calling a basic income grant, and that would still only be for the unemployed. Wouldn't be fully universal, but then hopefully, they're discussing too about that being the first step to expanding to everybody. So South Africa also has some promise, and South Korea, they had a elected a new president fairly recently, and if there was, if you could think of the two major candidates as Democrats and Republicans, um, one of the candidates was running on basic income, and just barely lost. So instead of like here with Andrew Yang running, where he was running in the
Right.
primary and then, didn't have a chance for running the general election,
Mhm.
um, in South Korea, they almost like he almost won. There were just it was like less than 1% of the vote meant that basic income, didn't happen essentially. So very close in South Korea.
Oh, wow. I always felt that, or I feel that unemployment is nice, but it sort of only happens if, like, you get fired.
Yeah.
I think that it should be that you should be able to quit your job and then you can elect to get, support for a certain amount of months. Have you heard any murmurs of something like that?
Yeah, the unemployment system is something that really is not fit for purpose anymore, and especially for the future of work. Um, and I hope that people kind of get a better understanding of this in during the pandemic, where I liked how this massive unemployment, or 20 million people lost their jobs in very short order, and the response from Congress was, "All right, so we're gonna boost the unemployment payments.
We're
Uh,
gonna give them money and we're gonna
right, we're gonna give an extra $600 per week, so an extra
Sorry
$2,400."
for laughing, but it was a kind of a cool time and a terrible time at the same time. So
Yeah, and
we know.
and besides that, then they also said, "Oh, wait, so let's look at all these gig laborers and everyone outside the traditional employment system. They don't have an unemployment system, so let's make sure that they have an unemployment,
Yeah.
payments during this too." So,
Uh-huh.
like temporarily, they recognized that the unemployment system was paying too
Yeah.
little and also not covering enough people. And of course, that was all just temporary. But it was just so interesting to see them acknowledge these issues. And also, yeah, there's a big difference between unemployment and UBI in general, because, with unemployment, if you get a job, you lose the unemployment income and then you
Right.
switch to wage income. And with basic income, you have basic income, you get a job, and now you have basic income and your job income. You never lose that. So unemployment can put you in this choice. We saw a lot of that during the pandemic too, with this higher amount.
Right.
So maybe you're
Right.
getting $3,000 a month unemployed, and you get a job offer for $2,000 a month. and it
It's
doesn't make
not worth
sense.
it.
Right, it
Nope.
doesn't make sense to do that.
So, what would you say to the naysayers, to those who say this will not work, this should not work? What are some of the things that you say to them?
Well, for me, I'm very evidence driven. So I like to encourage people to look at what we know. Again, this is what even drew me to it in the first place, was when I discovered the idea. Like, one of the first things I did was like, all right, does it work? Because that's
Mhm,
really all
mhm.
what I essentially care about, was if something works or not.
Right,
And so I looked at the evidence, and yes, it works. It just has so many different positive impacts, and these main concerns that people have are just entirely overblown. Like this, the one of the primary concerns is, oh, people will stop working. And
mhm.
again, if you understand the incentive difference between basic income and traditional conditional stuff and means tested stuff, it just makes more sense that there's a greater incentive to accept employment if
Right.
you get to keep your income in addition to it. And, that way, all work always pays and you're always better off. So not only does that theoretically make sense when you think about it, but that's what the evidence shows too, is that people just don't reduce their work significantly. You do see some reductions in specific groups, like um, those who decide to go back to school. They're
Mhm.
teenagers. They decide to finish school, or they decide to go to college. That's something that happens regularly. And also, if you're the mother of a newborn,
Yes.
it'll
Oh,
treat
yeah.
it like paid maternity leave, because we don't have paid maternity leave. So it
Right.
just enables mothers to
Better for kids.
stay home. Yeah,
Yeah.
during that really important time.
So tell me about Income to Support All Foundation. How do we segue into if municipalities wanna know more about the subject or, what can they find out through your organization or how do you help?
Well, the Income to Support All Foundation is set up to support ambitious projects that are focused on direct implementation of basic income, and also research and storytelling. And our first two projects are that we're supporting are called Bootstraps and Commingle. So these projects, just to kind of summarize them, Bootstraps is a docu series in development that was centered around a essentially a small pilot. They provided a basic income of $1,000 per month per adult, and $333 per month per kid to 11 households. So this was 21 people in total, kids and adults alike. And this is across the country. It was a very diverse group of recipients. And they were followed for 2.5 years. And so, unlike traditional documentaries and stuff where sit down with a bunch of people like me and academics and talking heads or whatever to talk about this, um, instead, these cameras were like embedded with the people who were living with the basic income during this time. So
Mhm.
you can really see, well, what it was like. It's like a depiction of a parallel universe where people have a basic income. So I'm really excited about that, getting through post production where it's at right now. Um, and then Commingle is a platform being developed that will enable people to join and um, immediately have a small basic income floor. We're hoping that it's somewhere around $50 per week is the goal. And this would be enabled by everyone contributing 7% of their income automatically. They would
Mhm.
attach their bank accounts, and then if you're each week you pay in, and each week you get out. You can be a net payer, a net recipient, depending on whatever that week is. But that there's this floor that the community together ensures that no one ever falls beneath, which would be around $200 per month.
Rochester, the city of Rochester is doing UBI right now, and I just think it's excellent. They're doing a pilot, and it inspired me to reach out to you. What are some tips that you'd give a city in their piloting, of this? Like, what are some things that you'd say?
Well, I would say most recently that I'm wary of the uh, the new response from those who are, I think, afraid and of the results of these pilots. This is over 150 pilots across the country so far, and each of the reports that have been released so far have been positive. Again, this is just something that we see all the time, that there's just so many different positive impacts. And we've seen bills be proposed in 7 states now that are looking to ban these pilots.
Mm,
Um, and this is the work of
are you
um,
serious?
yeah, this
Hmm.
is the work of mainly the work of the Foundation for Government Accountability. They're part of the State Policy Network, and I'm starting to see some other organizations too. But they're pushing these bills to ban basic income pilots, and so I think that at this point, if you're looking to design a pilot, you should keep that in mind, and just consider doing something in your pilot that makes it much harder for these interests to get rid of.
Oh.
As an example, if the pilot includes a bunch of veterans, or maybe it's like a first responders pilot. What happens? How does it impact teachers and firefighters and stuff like
Hmm.
that's a lot harder to cancel than, let's say, if you're running a pilot and you're like, hey, let's just focus on undocumented immigrants, or let's focus on um, you know anything else that is essentially what welfare already focuses on. Like, because a lot of these interests
Right.
are anti-welfare, and
I
you got to
see.
like widen this out and look at more universal, and I think focus on more on these groups and designs that conservatives and stuff would be more interested in. Like, I'd love to see a coal miners pilot too.
Like, Alaska can do it, but not you. Like, no, we'll keep this over there. That's a shame. So, a couple of things. Last thoughts?
I would say that 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 we should see basic income as being an investment. You know, this is we need to recognize that poverty and chronic insecurity, these things are actually extremely expensive. This they result in higher rates of crime. They result in higher rates of sickness, requiring more medical interventions. They result in lower productivity from people being, less able to get a job, or only being locked into less productive jobs, being locked out of education. Like,
Yeah.
we should see this as something that we're going to spend upfront, and we're going to invest in people, and as a result we're going to save a lot of money down the line, to the point where I would argue that it pays for itself. Like, this is, if you look at a study of, say, child poverty is a good example. The estimate is that child poverty costs the US over $1 trillion per year. So that's
Mm,
what we're spending on the downstream impacts of child poverty. And when we reduced child poverty and cut it almost in half with a monthly child tax credit, the cost of making that permanent was around $100 billion per year. And people looked at that and said, "Oh, $100 billion per year, that's too much money. That'll grow the deficit, and that's just, we can't afford that." And they're just
right.
ignoring the fact that we're spending $1 trillion on
Yeah,
child poverty. So we
right.
can save so much more money by just making sure and investing in people up front. And that's how I think that people should look at basic income as this foundational floor of investment in every single individual, and that trusts them and provides everyone with the freedom to make their own decisions. And I think that's what leads to the best outcomes. Just trust people to make their own decisions. And some of those can be mistakes, but that's how we learn. Everyone learns from these mistakes, so everyone has to be able to make them, and in doing so, um, they'll learn, and we'll all be better off.
Well, thank you, Scott. You're a crusader in this and an advocate. And hopefully, in 5 years, I'll be spending my UBI check at the public market to buy some apples and other local goods.
Right. Whatever
Uh,
you want to spend the money on, that's all you.
yeah, all right, cool. But thank you so much, Scott, for your time today. So fortunate to have you on. And if people want to find you, where do they go?
Yeah, check out scottsantens.com. I have a UBI FAQ there that I try to answer a lot of frequently asked questions. So it's a good starting point for just reading a bunch of different articles around a bunch of different just common questions about basic income.
And then I search for you in the podcast world. Where can they find you and what should they look for?
You can find my podcast channel as the Scott Santens UBI Enterprise. You can find that anywhere you're looking for podcasts.
Awesome. All right. Well, have a good day, Scott.
Thank you, Amaret.
Thank you. See ya.
See you later.
That concludes this episode of Workers Rock. Thank you for listening.